heroes of Scripture, they're probably going to be much more familiar. But it's still good to sort of highlight who they are. So let's get the basics out of the way. Who was the individual known as Noah? Give me the most basic thing you want, if you like.
He was a just man, perfect in his generation, walked with God, had 3 sons, built the ark, did all that God commanded.
There you go. The verse that she's referring to is Genesis 6 and verse 9, at least with some of her description of Noah, and really verses 10 and following. The Bible says in the beginning of this sort of the third portion of Genesis, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and he had 3 sons. Right? Obviously, the builder of the ark. Anything you can tell me about Noah that precedes Genesis 6 and verse 8? Yep.
He would have been a patriarch.
Okay. So by patriarch, you mean?
He was the head of a family and sort of, God dealt with the family through him.
Yes. So God's dealings with people really came through his dealings with families.
Yeah.
And you might say that's still true of Israel, but they're not a nation yet. There's no Israel to speak of at the moment. Rita, did you have a comment?
He was the 10th generation from Adam.
Okay. So as Genesis 5 tells us, 10th generation after Adam, that means he was of whose line?
Seth.
He's an eventual descendant of Seth, right? Genesis 5 takes us the 10 generations from Seth, or from Adam to Noah. Genesis 11, no, is it 11? That takes us from Shem down to Abram, right? So the son of Noah takes us down from there down to Abram. So he's of the line of Shem. Wait, I have the wrong one, don't I? Seth. I meant to say Seth there. My apologies. He's of the line of Seth. Shem is his son. It's kind of hard to be the descendant of Shem when you're the dad. So he's of the lineage of Seth, and he fathers Shem. Okay. The meaning of his name. If you look at there at the end of Genesis 5, Lamech, not the same Lamech as Genesis 4, that's a different guy, but another man named Lamech has a son named Seth, and he describes something about, or I can't say anything today. Lamech has a son named Noah. Got it. What does he say about Noah and his name? What does his name mean, according to Lamech? This is Genesis 5 and verse 29. He names his son Noah. Why? Right. He says, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. The word there for relief, have it in the footnote, sounds like the Hebrew word for rest. And that's the idea behind Noah's name. There is some irony in that. Noah does indeed bring a cessation of toil on the earth. Not in the way maybe Lamech wanted, but Noah and his sons do arrive at the very time in which the painful toil of the earth will stop, at least for a great period of time. As was mentioned already, he is married. He has 3 sons. What is the name of Noah's wife? Mrs. Noah. Very good. Let's carry on. I have a good story about that. Don't ask me afterwards, I'll tell you. So he and Mrs. Noah and 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, who we don't know their name either, form the 8 individuals who are saved on the ark. It says in Genesis 6 and verse 8 that Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. And that comes after the description in 5 through 7 of the great wickedness of the earth. It is an astounding place to think about, a place that would be even beyond our own world. The wickedness of man was great in the earth. Every intentions of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Not every way you can imagine that the world was bad. That's Noah's generation. But Noah finds favor in God's eyes. As was said a moment ago, he's a righteous man. He's blameless in his generation. The idea of being blameless is mentioned in a couple of other places. In 2 Samuel, as David, really 2 Samuel 22 quotes Psalm 18, David describes himself in verse 21 as God dealt with him according to his righteousness. And in verse 22, he had kept the ways of the Lord. He had not wickedly departed from God. And in verse 24, he was blameless before him. David refers to himself in that same sort of language that Genesis describes Noah, a person that was righteous and blameless. All of Israel was called to blamelessness in Deuteronomy 18. A little further in the in the flood narrative, in 7 and verse 1 of Genesis, God comments again, I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. So both the narrator of Genesis and the Lord is said to have called him a righteous and blameless person.
Kyle,
Yes, sir.
I noticed that Job was described probably closer to anything.
Yes.
That he was a man that was blameless and upright, who feared God and turned away from evil. Very similar to Noah.
What would be the fascinating question is Job described in Noah's language, or is Noah described in Job's language? We don't know, right? Because we don't know when Job was dated. We imagine very, very, very early. Now you mentioned Job. That connection comes up later too. We're going to get to it in a second. It says that Noah walked with God in Genesis 6 and verse 9. Only one other person said to have done that in that exact phrase. That would be Enoch, back in chapter 5. Now, Enoch is special in chapter 5 because what happens to him? Just something happened, and he went directly from being alive to being with God in heaven. That happens 2 more times in the Bible. Elijah and Jesus. Right? Jesus ascends bodily alive to his Father in heaven. Of course, Jesus then died first, and Elijah and Enoch did not. The connection with Job is made in Ezekiel 14. This isn't a positive passage. This is really a passage of great condemnation against Israel, and sort of in that chapter. Ezekiel 14 and verse 12. He said, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, when a land sins against me by acting faithlessly, and I stretch out my hand against it and break its supply of bread and send famine upon it and cut off from it man and beast, even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver but their own lives by their righteousness, declares the Lord God. God says, when I show up to judge the people for their great wickedness, even if those 3 men were there, they would manage only to save themselves by their behavior. Their positive relationship with God would result in only their deliverance, which tells you just how bad Israel is because of that. They are mentioned again in that same chapter in verse 20, Noah, Daniel, and Job. So that gives you, like Mike pointed out earlier with the way Job's described in Job 1, some sense of who Noah was, his character, that he would be repeatedly aligned with a person like Job. Of course, if you go back to Hebrews, you go further in your Bible to Hebrews chapter 11, Noah is mentioned there. Hebrews 11 and in verse 7, he's the third one mentioned behind Abel and Enoch. It says there, by faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. He's an example of that sort of behavior also. The only other connection that I know of, and there may be more, is, Mark, you brought this up yesterday when we were talking. Noah is described in 2 Peter 2 as, I think in older versions says preacher of righteousness, is that correct? Herald of righteousness, messenger, someone who proclaimed, preacher of righteousness there. So, a person that's mentioned all over the scriptures very, very positively. certainly applies. Yes, sir.
I've always wondered, I understand that, Noah was blameless, righteous, and things of that nature. That doesn't necessarily mean sinless.
Correct. Yes.
But this was before the law. How did they make amends, if they did sin? How did he become righteous if he did sin? If it was before the law was given and stuff like that.
The way in which they dealt with their sin, I don't know. I really don't know that we have a lot of
So it's not
specifics.
easy.
We do know they had law, right? And not least of which the prohibition against killing other people, in Genesis 9 and whatever laws would have existed before that. He knows to offer sacrifice to God and even what animals to offer once he leaves the ark.
That's where I never really.
But the
understood
specifics
what
of how they would come before God, that I'm not
Yeah,
not so
obviously,
sure on.
all the way back to Cain and Abel, they knew that they had to offer, to God.
Right. Mike?
Well, if we have it enabled, as he mentioned, but how do you get faith? Faith comes by hearing. God must have told them what to do, or they would not have known how to approach it.
Right. So what I think it's the difficulty is like what exactly was his standard? What exactly was his law set? We don't know, but we know that he kept it, right? Whatever that was. Kendrick.
But we just read you walk with God too. So in that, when you're walking with somebody in that manner, it's probably not gonna be written down, but between the two of you, this is what I need you to do for whatever.
There's a deep relationship between the two. Well, as I say later, and I think is it Proverbs or Ecclesiastes? Can two walk together unless they be agreed? Right? There's a notion that they had the same mindset, and they understood one another and how they should relate to each other. Mark, you sure?
Yeah.
All right.
Michael.
There you go. All right. Definitely someone to examine. Now, I like this section because we get to talk about not so much what they do wrong, but what they do right. Okay, what is it, if you had to boil it down to, a few different things, what is it about the description of Noah that tells us, okay, here's what he got right. He's obviously, as you mentioned, he's not sinless. He's not Jesus. And we're going to notice that with all of our heroes. No. In our text this morning, we don't get to the thing that happened in chapter 9, which is obviously an example of Noah's imperfection. But this section is going to be devoted to what did he do right? That is something for us to imitate.
I would say the first thing he did right, he rejected his culture.
And I put that at the end because I thought about it later. But you're absolutely right. He did not live according to the majority culture around him.
Think of it this way, as I thought about this, I would describe this as God is telling us that from the world's perspective, everything's going great. Men are bigger than they've ever been. Family, they're having children, they're growing, everything is looking up. From the point of view of the world,
Right.
everything's going great. From God's perspective, it couldn't be worse.
Yeah. Technologically, they're advancing, right? And that's normally seen as a sign of a culture's health and that sort of thing. But that wasn't the part that mattered, right? As God saw it, only evil continually, right?
I thought it was interesting. Not only did Noah do what he was told to do, he did it when it appears he probably really didn't understand it. And I think sometimes that we struggle with that. Sometimes just because God said so isn't a good enough answer for us.
Right. One perspective I heard on that, which I think is a good one. Noah built an ark even though there had been no other arks built. Right? His obedience had to come without precedent. It's easier to obey if, okay, someone else already did the thing and you just know you have to do that to get the same result. In Noah's case, this is completely new. Right? This is a new notion. And it takes quite a while. It takes, dozens of years to do this. I'm going to go ahead and put this one up here because you mentioned the idea of his obedience. This is sort of the drumbeat that works its way through this section. I mean, it's said over and over and over. What is fascinating to me, in Genesis 6 through 8, Noah says nothing. There is no indication that he speaks until the incident after he gets drunk and the thing that goes on with his sons. That's the first time he talks in the text. But what it does say of him and his responses, 6 and verse 22, Noah did this, he did all that God commanded him. And then at the end of 7 and verse 5, Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. 7 and verse 16, those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded them. Right? Over and over and over, it keeps telling you, here's the thing Noah did. God gave him instructions. He followed those instructions. He was obedient. Yes, sir.
It's interesting that the verses there in Hebrews, he became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith, right? But at the beginning, we see that he was motivated by fear and did works, right? So the fear motivated him, and a lot of people nowadays, God shouldn't be something we fear. He was full of love, he's full of grace, but not only did he fear him, but he went and did the thing he knew he needed to do.
Yeah.
So his works proved his faith.
I love the way it's worded there. It's reverent fear, which is not a fear of malicious activity or ill will, but a proper fear of who you are dealing with. Right? You are dealing with the Creator, and out of that, actions happen. Right? And then it says they occurred by faith. It's an awesome reference. Okay, what else? If you think about Noah, what did he do besides just did what he was told?
He taught his sons. Not only did he obey, but his family obeyed as well.
Yes.
So he influenced his family to also follow after God.
As proper leader of his family, right? Patriarchal way. And that should occur during any age, but he convinced his sons and their wives and Mrs. Noah to go along with this endeavor. I mean, just considering the amount of lumber that would have had been gathered and the work involved in building this is astounding. No wonder it took as long as it did. When does it? Oh, I used to know right in front of me where it was.
I think you're probably thinking about 6:3 where it says.
Yeah, that's it.
120 years.
Yeah.
They didn't have any power tools.
Yeah. Yeah, they had hammers and saws and elbow grease. That's what they had to build the ark. They needed a good DeWalt, maybe.
Yeah, because you need to consider that while he was building the ark, we don't know. He may well have hired other people to help him in the building. They'd have thought he's crazy, but he pays.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Or if nothing else, just to gather the materials. Right? However he had to get those. And it wasn't like in the really terrible version of the Noah's Ark where Russell Crowe is Noah, where they hired the fallen angels to do it. That's complete hogwash. That's completely useless. Anyway, one thing I caught, and I love doing this because you read through a text again and something else catches your eye, and you've probably had that experience, right? You read through something you've read dozens of times, and something else catches your eye. When does God tell Noah to open the window above the ark? If you're looking for it and you can't find it, that's good, because there is no reference to Noah being instructed to open the window. But in 8 and verse 6, when does Noah open the window? At the end of 40 days. Why 40 days? Because God told Noah it would quit raining after 40 days. Right? He says so plainly in chapter 7, right? It would be 7 verse 4. First 7 in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And then after 40 days and 40 nights, he opens the window. Right? Now we can already make the point that he's trusted God's word. He's built this ark and it's obviously saved him. But even after that, when God says 40 days later it's going to stop raining, 40 days later, he opens the window. There's some continued trust in God's word, I think you could draw from that. Anyway, just something interesting reading it through. Mike?
Yeah, if you're making this judgment based on 8:6,
Yeah.
you've got a whole sequence of time in between. Chapter 8, verse 1, you've got the 150 days, the water's abated, and it keeps on going down the 10th month and so forth. So
Right.
at the end of 40 days, seems logically to follow after those periods of time
Okay.
that is there. I thought one of the most significant statements is 8:1, God remembered Noah.
Right.
There's about 3 or 4 times in Genesis and Exodus where that phrase is used, that God remembered Noah. In 1929, he did the same thing with Lot at Sodom and Gomorrah. And in 30:22, I forgot what the incident was there, but he remembers that person as well. Let me get over and see who it is. He remembered Rachel whenever she could not
Yeah.
have children. And I think it also occurs in Exodus once that
It does.
it's sort of a turning point.
Not that God had forgotten
Right.
at all,
He
but
knows everything, but it shows he's attentive to their needs
it's
at that time.
might be the closest word we have for God's acting based on something He's promised in the past, right? The same way we would say remember, and it calls us to do something. God remembered His promise and held to that. Did you have a?
But I've got, in my Bible, I've got that marked as that's the main point of this whole account. You think about Noah, as bad as the world
Yes.
was, he was the only one. Well, it almost would feel if you were Noah like it went from bad to worse.
Right.
Now you're in a boat with 7 other people and a bunch of animals, and there's no land. So it is possible, but if I can see from Noah's view, it doesn't look like this has gotten better. Now I'm just floating,
Yeah.
and there's
That line, God remembered Noah, I didn't put it in here, and I probably should have. The structure of this account centers on that point. And you can see that even one way, just looking there in the text. In 7 and 24, the water prevails 150 days, and then God remembered Noah. And then in 8 and verse 3, again, the 150 days is mentioned. There are lots of those kind of things. You'll find something on either side of 8 and verse 1 that matches. And it focuses the attention on that central area, right? That God remembered Noah and went from there. All right? What else in the account strikes you as Noah did something right?
What struck me was, speaking of the window, Noah had to follow those commandments exactly. It wasn't where he could say, oh, okay, God said build this big boat, so, he said one window, but, I really think it would be better if we went over here too. And, even in chapter 6, verse 8, New King James still says, my version says, Noah found grace. And I know a lot of versions say favor. But, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He still had to obey.
Right.
Regardless. He still had to follow the exact pattern because, I don't think that boat would have floated had he chosen to start modifying the commandments. And so being favored by God and being shown God's grace at that point didn't allow him to make up his own rules.
Right. He didn't allow his being shown something that was unrelated to his merit, his ability to earn that, did not excuse him from being careful to obey what he was given. Right. Yes, sir.
Put down his perseverance. He took 120 years to build an ark. That's longer than you and I are going to live.
Yeah. Well, they had more time back then. He's 500 years old when he has children. There's, or within that 500 years, maybe afterwards, but they had more time to deal with back then. But certainly it's still, even if you divided that by 10, it's still a long time, right? No way to really get around that. Okay. I like in 8 and verse 20 when Noah gets off the ark. One more thing that you read the text and something catches your eye. Well, in this case, someone else is reading it caught my eye, and I was able to notice it. Doesn't it strike you as interesting that Noah builds an altar and he offers some of every clean bird and offers them as burnt offerings on the altar? There aren't that many animals left. It's not like Noah could go out to his great flock of clean animals and take some of them and offer them as sacrifices. How many are there at this point in the ark? How many clean animals does he have? 7 of each, right? He's taking a huge percentage of the world's population of clean animals at that point and offering them as sacrifice, right? That part of that just struck me as very, very interesting. He offers to God something that pleases him, and then God responds by saying he would never again curse the ground in that way. But he wasn't willing to be, or he wasn't stingy with what he had. Even what he had, as small as it was, some of it was given to God in sacrifice. That aspect of his behavior here, I thought was very, very interesting. And then this was the point that was made a minute ago. Before he's ever even given the instructions on how to build the ark, he did not follow the majority culture. The world around him was greatly wicked. He chose, and his family chose a different path. And he finds favor in God's eyes because of that. All right, let's think about connections to Jesus. Where and how do we see Jesus' identity and his life and that sort of thing referenced or foreshadowed in Noah's life and what he did? What'd you come up with on that? Did you have?
The world was saved due to Noah. Had it not been for Noah, it appears God would have wiped out everything.
Yes.
So everyone is saved through Noah.
Yeah. Everyone that was saved on the earth was saved through this one man, right? And the same would be amplified forward looking through Christ, right? Christ will save more than 6 or 7 people, but the notion of it is the same, right? Through one man, everyone that is saved finds salvation, right? What else? Connection to Noah. How does Noah remind you of Jesus? Not at all. That's the only one, right?
Well, kind of related to that, like in the same way, there are people that are saved, everyone else is lost.
Yes.
There's no in between.
Yes.
And there's no going back.
Yeah, there are no hangers-on on the outside of the ark. The line is drawn, right? Sheep and goats, right hand, left hand, and you're either in one or the other. It's a sobering contrast to think about the difference between those two. All right, what else?
He kept all the commandments God gave him. That was said about him 4 times, as you said.
Right.
Mentioned.
Noah keeps God's commandments. Now that reminds you of Jesus because
He was the only perfect man.
Jesus did that, right? So the comparisons are rarely ever going to be one-to-one or direct, right? The thing Noah does positively, Jesus does more positively. And that's true for any connection you're going to find between a human and Christ. Whatever it was he did right, Jesus is going to do more right. You can think about Noah having built a vehicle for salvation. Everyone in it is saved. Jesus does the same thing, right?
And just because of Noah, we're given a promise. God says, the seed time and harvest,
Yes.
that kind of stuff. We're given a much greater promise through Christ.
The limitation of Noah's promise is in 8 and verse 22, while the earth remains. Through Jesus, we are given a promise of eternal prosperity and deliverance and safety and that kind of thing. Absolutely. You can think about it like this. Think about Matthew 24. Jesus described his own coming, the second coming, in the language of Noah. He even says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. And the specific point he's making in Matthew 24 is this. He says, he's referring to the second coming. Concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now, what point does Jesus go on to make there? What's the comparison he makes? What does he mean by that?
When judgment comes, either you're ready or you're not.
Okay.
There is no time for preparation once the event starts.
Without warning.
Yeah, there is absolutely no warning. So much so that everybody is doing as they did before. Verse 38, for as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. And Jesus' instruction there is to get ready now, prepare, right? Do even as Noah did. Get ready before it starts raining. Because once that starts to happen in the global sense, there's no time left to prepare. Right? The ark was closed before it started raining, and everyone inside was saved from that. So Jesus even makes the point that his own coming would be like that of Noah. When you describe, and this is what we were talking about earlier, if you describe Noah as blameless and righteous, if you describe Job or Daniel or anyone else in that language, Jesus is ultimately so. In regard to a certain thing, a person might be blameless. But in regard to everything, Jesus was blameless. No blame was ever found in any part of his life that was legitimate. People blame Jesus for all kinds of things, but none of them were legitimate claims that he would have been sinful. People do right things. Jesus did everything right. Right, and that's sort of the contrast between those two. One person, and I was reading this, and they just put it, salvation through willing obedience. All of us are to be saved by Jesus because Jesus did precisely as God instructed him to. Right? It's the way it's described in Philippians 2. You remember the description of Jesus leaving heaven and coming to earth. It says in Philippians 2 and verse 8, being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And then God has exalted him, and then we're able to confess him as Lord and follow him to our own salvation. But that is unlocked because Jesus did perfectly what God told him to do. Right? Even in the garden, begging that maybe there be another path available to him. Since there wasn't, he obeyed. Right? Noah's obedience led to the salvation of his people. Same it is with Jesus. Right? And that's another good connection we have between the two. Noah's name means rest. Whatever rest was promised through Noah, a greater and more perfect rest is promised through Christ. And they just keep going, right? You can keep drawing these sorts of comparisons. If Noah walked with God, how much more did Jesus do so? One thing to say you have a relationship with God, another thing to say you are God. Right? That relationship cannot be closer than the one Jesus has with his Father. And then you think about the idea that at some point in Noah's life, he finished the work God gave him to do. The ark was completed one day. And Jesus made reference to his own work being completed also. We're hopefully going to talk about that a little bit later. Okay, how can we do the imitate Noah thing? Tell me what we can do to be like him as we seek to follow Christ. This is our last few minutes of our discussion. How do we make this available in our life? Yep.
As you mentioned, we don't have recording of Noah's words when it comes to him, but that stands out to me that he didn't object or argue for a different way, or he didn't want to do this or anything like that. And so, I mean, one of the big lessons for myself is shut up and do the work.
Yeah. It is just odd in the record of Genesis that he just says nothing. He just does what he's told to do, and that can be a powerful lesson for us. Is be quiet and do as God has told us to do, right? And it doesn't mean you don't get to express fear and prayer, and all those things aren't excluded. But at some point, I have to stop objecting and start carrying out what God asked me to do.
Well, I'm trying to admire Noah, but sometimes you get discouraged as a preacher because nobody listens. For 120 years, he had a message to preach, and how many listened?
Yeah.
Be easy to quit preaching, wouldn't it?
If you were measuring him in terms of conversions,
Yeah.
you come away going, well, he didn't.
It must not have been
It's an
positive
active
mental
failure, yes.
attitude.
Yeah. But then Peter calls him
Preacher of
a hare or a preacher of righteousness, right? It's because it's not about the conversion rate. The conversion rate has to take into account who's being talked to. And the world he's talking to is beyond wicked. But he continued to preach, and he continued to have that message, and try, I'm sure, to convince people to come on with him and be saved from something like this.
Mike is stealing my point. I was going to say, listen carefully. It started with Noah listening to what God had to say, understanding what, and then because he carried it out because he's given dimensions. He's told how to do this. So he had to listen carefully so he understood what he needed to do to be accepted by God.
Right.
Now, if you don't listen carefully, no matter what you do will result in failure because you're not doing according to the instruction being given to you.
Right. It's another one of those instances of, the details matter. I always used to wonder when I was a kid, people would always bring up the gopher wood thing, right? Well, if he'd built it out of some other kind of wood, it wouldn't have floated. I go, well, I think we can pretty well demonstrate other sorts of wood would float. And at that point always sort of puzzled me, and then I got later, what was the point? The detail mattered, right? Even down to that level, the detail mattered. Because it was more than whether the wood would float. It was whether or not you would trust that God told you the correct way to do this and follow that, right? Building it out of another sort of wood isn't just a mistake, in carpenter work. It's a failure to trust God's instructions, which is itself a failure to trust God. There's no faith there, right? And so, thankfully, that came to the front.
At the Ark Encounter, one of the things they bring up, which is interesting, never thought about it, is that gopher wood may not have been a species of wood. It may have been a process, a way of treating the wood.
To gopherize it.
Yeah, they go for the wood, yeah.
I don't know what you call it. I mean, you got
Yeah, they're just saying, and they just brought that up as a point.
ancient pressure-treated lumber was called gopher wood.
Wait,
Who knows?
what it is.
Mike,
One more.
please tell me it's about gopherization. Okay.
Do you reckon Noah's wife ever complained about how much money his dad spent on that stupid ark?
Oh goodness, I don't know. I would assume trees were next to free, but
Yeah.
It cost him a lot of his wealth,
yeah,
but he comes out the richest man because he owns the whole world.
yeah. He's the only one left after all of this. He and his sons would have had to continue supporting themselves, farming or animal husbandry, whatever it was, But you think about all of his other time was spent building this enormous thing. Andrew, you have another?
I'm kind of going off what David said earlier, like, in the New Testament, when we hear God asking, or Christ asking people to follow him, or to follow his commandments, or do these things, it's followed with a lot of questions. And I'm sure he had questions in walking with God, but there were no questions that God saw fit to put in the Word.
Right.
And so to me, that's very interesting. There was no questioning, well, how am I going to eat on the ark? And what am I going to have when everything else that I've accumulated over 600 years or whatever,
Right.
when all of that is gone and I have nothing, right? You never ask God, why are you leaving me with that? It's very interesting to me that over this long course of time, like Mike said earlier, that consistency in his work and his faith in God to provide for him, we have to do that same thing. We are building our ark of faith, air quotes, right? Through our works that we do, through our faith, through our studying, so that when the time does come, we're ready for that. Things kind of going off what he said, there's no...
The day of judgment, the resurrection from the dead, all of that are, globally speaking, cataclysmic events that have no precedent. And yet God has told us this will happen. I'm not telling you when, but this will happen. Prepare. right? Faith is called in Hebrews 1 the conviction of things not seen. Not just, oh, I think it will, but I think it will, and therefore I will build, sacrifice, serve, those sorts of things. We have to be willing to obey God when there's no precedent for our doing so. And that's true at the great level, and that's true at the micro level too. If no one in your family has ever followed Christ, and they've all thought this to be a silly, religious exercise, you're going to have to do the Noah thing and decide to serve even when no one else has given you any encouragement to do so, right? You can think about who else in Noah's family would have thought he was crazy doing this. And at a much smaller level, we have to do that too. One more.
Even his, I think about like friends that we had, right? He never asked for his best friend. He had to have a friend at some point, living.
Well, maybe not after this.
And being around, right? Being around that long, it was never, a question of, hey, can you save my friend as well? And my friend, his hope and his goal and his target, his mind and his heart was always on God.
Yep. Get on the ark, and that's where your salvation's found. Today, religiously, we're hearing a lot of noise about how, I think this was something Arita was alluding to earlier, is, the grace will cover all the things we decide not to do, sort of mentality. The fact that we know of Christ and we are given the gospel and we're given this opportunity are acts of grace that have no calculable value, right? They are, and by that I mean it's too much. There's no way to even quantify the depth, the level of that gift. And yet, in that same message, we're told repeatedly, obey what God tells you to do. Do it exactly, do it correctly, do it the way God intended you to do that. Jesus connected repeatedly love for him and keeping his commandments over and over and over again, right? The person who responds properly to God's grace doesn't say, well, great, I get to do what I want now because God will take care of the rest. Noah didn't get to live how he wanted to going forward. He got to be a boat builder the rest of his life, or at least the rest until the flood happened, But it was his choice to obey God's instructions carefully, and ours has to be that same sort of thing. And I think another big lesson from Noah's life is sometimes the majority culture is wrong. We have this idea that if everybody believes a thing, then we're going to be okay. Sometimes that's not true. Rarely you might say that that's ever true. It certainly wasn't true in Noah's day. We have to be willing to trust God more than we trust the world around us. Right? So there's a point to be made there. And then I put this one just here at the end. Preach what's spiritually profitable, not popular. It would have been popular to tell everybody, hey, the world's going to end, and you need to help out and get on this boat before that happens. Clearly it didn't resonate with the people around him, but that didn't matter. It was the right thing to say. We have to be willing to do that as well. Okay, looking next week, Lord willing, at Abraham. Quite a bit of text there. Can't find anything good about Abraham. You didn't open the Bible, all right, because it's all over the place. Lord willing, we'll talk about that next week. Thank you guys for your comments this morning, and we'll carry on then.